Good evening. You can.
Should I start if
Yes,
everyone is?
yes, 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 Dhruv. We can go start.
I'll just share my screen. So just inquiring before I start, screen is visible to everyone, audio is completely viewable.
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us on this fine. I'll just start the video also. Thank you once again for joining us on this fine Friday evening. For people who are joining us from Delhi, I'm sure the rains must have played havoc in the past few days, and I'm sure in Mumbai the situation would have been much worse. And thank you once again for taking out time on a Friday evening. I know it's not the easiest of times to speak to a tax consultant, but this year the budget coming twice has given us an opportunity to interact with you two times in a year, and it is obviously our pleasure to be able to interact. So with the new government coming in place, there were a lot of hopes and expectations from the budget. It has delivered in some ways, it hasn't delivered in some ways. Opinion remains divided. Just some thoughts before I get down to the tax proposals is on from the macroeconomic perspective. There is over the next 5 to 7 years, there is an increased emphasis on electronics manufacturing, development of manufacturing, and manufacturing related exports. Services will now take backstage in terms of government policy, and the entire emphasis seems to be on generating employment, which can only be generated through a massive increase in manufacturing operations. That's the first thing we see. Second thing is we are seeing a lot of tax buoyancy. The government has ample amount of tax collection, and obviously that is going into a lot of fiscal swaps that the government is also giving out. We don't see government having a fiscal deficit, so government borrowing should ideally remain low. Inflationary trends also seem to be in line with global inflation being in control, but food inflation is facing a lot of headway. Recently, there has been the case of McDonald's, which released its annual results only to see that its sales had fallen, and the primary reason was that customers had stopped going to McDonald's because of the rapid amount of food inflation taking place. But oil prices are in check, and commodity prices are also relatively okay. There is a lot of deflationary data coming out from China, so most probably we'll be not seeing high amount of inflation. With that being said, and with this macroeconomic backdrop, we'll obviously be covering changes in direct tax law, changes in GST law, and questions and discussions. So we've covered the major parts of the macroeconomic macroeconomic features of the budget. Tax collections have obviously seen a rise. Foreign exchange reserves have grown. The economy is doing. There's a lot of health in the economy, but obviously there is a lot of jobless growth also that we're seeing. That is why the whole emphasis. Core inflation has dropped to a 4-year low, which is a very healthy sign. In terms of the key features of what the direct tax proposals of the budget has elucidated, one is a very small, not impacting a lot of ISODA members, but tax rates on foreign companies has reduced to 35% from 40%. Secondly, there has been abolition of the buyback tax. This is going to impact a lot of people who were planning to repatriate some of the profits out of their companies. So if you are someone who has a private limited company and was looking for ways on how to extract profits as a promoter, this is going to impact you. If you have any income tax litigations pending, it's a good time to resolve them. The Vivad Se Vishwas scheme has been reintroduced. It's going to be in play till 31st December 2024, where you can file and pay the tax amount without the interest and the penalty. There's been some amount of change in equalization levy, but this won't be impacting a lot of ISODA members. There's an abolition of angel tax. So if you were planning on raising funds on a valuation, yes, as an investee company, this is excellent and good news for you. With that being said, we'll move on to the major proposals of the direct tax. One of the key things which was in the media and which will impact maybe all of us at some point or the other, is that there has been a major change in the capital gains regime. This is, I would say, more of a tectonic shift in how capital gains will be charged and was being charged, effective from 23rd July 2024 onwards. So just to cover, let's get back to the slide. Just to cover what all differences were there. The first difference is that now the concept of long-term capital gains beyond 3 years period is a finished concept. Now there are only two holding periods when you're holding any form of capital gain. Shares hoye, securities hoye, be it your property, be it gold, be it any form of asset that you're holding, you have to think it only in terms of two things: whether I'm holding it for 12 months or 24 months. Depending upon the type of assets, there are only two gradations: 12 months and 24 months. So for example, in case of listed securities, which is your equity shares, equity oriented mutual funds, it still remains the same: 12 months for short term and beyond 12 months long term. For unlisted equity shares, it remains same. Old was 24 months, 24 months. So if you're planning to buy and sell shares of your private limited company, the holding period for it to be considered long term was 24 months and will be still 24 months. Same for equity oriented mutual funds. For immovable property also the same, but for other assets like debentures, units of AIF, REITs, InvITs, it has now gone from 36 months to 24 months. So the concept of 36 months anywhere in the capital gain regime has now vanished. Everywhere it is 24 months or 12 months. In case of hard assets like property, etc., it's going to be 24 months. Even in case of hard assets like gold, if you're holding physical gold, it's going to be 24 months from the earlier 36 months. In case of securities, unlisted securities would be 24 months, and listed securities, mutual fund, etc., will be 12 months. Now, what has been the changes in the capital gain regime? There is now a single rationalized rate for all long-term capital gains except for unlisted debentures. So for all long-term capital assets, the rate is now 12.5%. Even if you're a resident, non-resident, the rate is now 12.5%. So stepwise, how do you need to calculate capital gains? First, what type of asset you're holding? Check if it's 12 months, 24 months. And then if it's more than 24 months, it's going to be 12.5% because it is always long term. If in case of equities, if more than 12 months, then it is going to be 12.5%. Now the second biggest change is that indexation benefit has been removed for computation of LTCG. Indexation was a way of linking the cost price to inflation for properties, which has now been removed effective 23rd July. Any property sold post 23rd July, the calculation is straightforward: sale price minus cost price into 12.5%. I'm repeating, simple calculation: sale price minus cost price into 12.5%. I will be covering this with an illustration in the second slide. Similarly, even in case of other long-term capital gains, for example, even if you're holding physical gold, for example, the indexation benefit has been removed. You now have to pay long-term capital gain tax at 12.5% on the absolute gain you have made. That is the first. The second is, in long-term capital gain, the exemption limit earlier was 1 lakh. Now it has gone to 1.25 lakhs, marginal change. Now 12.5%, I repeat, is applicable to all long-term assets except for unlisted debentures, which will be taxed at slab rate. In short-term capital gains for equity shares, primarily for equity shares, the rate has gone from 15 to 20%. Now, what does this signal? Obviously, there is a signaling of a significant simplification of tax law. It is also a signal that there might be future increases in the long-term and the short-term capital gains tax till the time they bring it to 30%. And the third signal, which I personally believe, is that now if you are buying a property and if you're selling that property, and if you buy a equity stock today, equity share today, if you're selling both of them after 2 years, they're being taxed at the same rate, which was a different case before 23rd July 2024, but is now the same. So this is a sea change in how the capital gains regime is being changed. Now long-term equity and long-term real estate remains taxable at blanket rate of 12.5%, sale minus cost. Let's understand with an example of how this will play out. Consider a person who was planning to sell out his property for 3 crore rupees on 18th July. How would he have calculated his capital gains? He would have taken his cost, which was, let's say, 50 lakhs. He would have indexed this cost. Indexation is basically adjustment of the cost as per inflation. So if he would have bought this property, let's say in 2001, he would have multiplied the property value by 3.63 times, which would have come out to 1 crore 81 lakh rupees. He would have calculated the capital gain of 20% on 3 crore minus 1 crore 81 lakh. Now on 23rd July, if that same person is planning to sell the property, he will calculate 12.5% on 2.5 crore rupees. No indexation now. I repeat, no indexation now. And I'm repeating, this is applicable for all property sales taking place on or after 23rd July. So if you sold a property before that, it doesn't impact you. If you're selling a property after that, the indexation benefit for you as per what the finance bill has said is effectively gone. In this specific instance, there is an additional tax outflow of 7,55,000. So for properties which are significantly old, which did enjoy the indexation benefit, there might be additional tax outgo on the sale of the property. Now, is this sure? I'm getting questions like on 23rd July, in fact, it is a little funny. I got calls at 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. from clients stating कि यार आज ही प्रॉपर्टी बेच देता हूँ, अब क्या करूँ, मैं तो कल ही बेचने वाला था. My advice to all of them was to please hold, because there have been representations being made to the government to please consider the indexation benefit, and the government is considering that for properties which are sold before 23rd July to give the benefit of either of the two schemes. So the government will basically say you can select whichever scheme is beneficial for you if you're selling the property before 23rd July. If you're selling the property after 23rd July, but it was bought before 23rd July, I'm sorry. So this grandfathering of indexation will take place, and it might be sunset in a future period. But if you are planning to change your decision of selling the property, I would suggest to please hold off till the time this is clarified as per the Finance Act, which is maybe a couple of weeks away. So once again, reiterating, holding periods of 12 months, 24 months, long-term capital gains, all taxable except for debentures at 12.5%. For short-term, only for equities, it is now 20%. The rest is taxable at slab rates. This summarizes the income tax changes from the capital gains perspective. Moving on to the personal tax regime. Very easy to summarize. There is no change in the old tax regime. I repeat, there is no change in the old tax regime that you could take benefit of 80C, 80D, etc. But in the new tax regime, there has been slight changes. The slab rate has been rationalized. So it was 3 lakh to 6 lakh over here. Previously, now it is 3 lakh to 7 lakh. And from 6 lakh to 9 lakh, it has gone to 7 lakh to 10 lakh. So this will result in some amount of tax saving, approximately 17,500 rupees. If you're opting for tax in the new regime. Standard deduction in both regimes has enhanced from 50 to 75,000. So very marginal change in the new tax regime. If you're in the old tax regime, not a major change from the personal tax regime. So effectively, for all practical purposes, no major changes in the personal tax regime. There is one interesting addition, is for ISODA members who are opting for national pension scheme. They were utilizing the benefit of NPS, where employer and employee was contributing up to a limit of 10% of the salary. Now that limit has gone to 14% of the salary. So if you were opting for PF and your staff wants rationalization of tax rates or tax savings, NPS is a good scheme to move to from the PF. Or if you're starting labor law compliance, NPS is now more attractive with 14% of employer contribution and employee contribution now deductible for taxation purposes. So not a huge amount of practical changes in the personal tax regime, but yes, NPS is a welcome addition. There is increased focus on NPS with it being linked to the equity markets, definitely a good instrument for employees and employers alike. If you are operating as a partnership firm, and if ISODA members were operating as a partnership firm or an LLP, there was a formula with which you could calculate how much remuneration would be tax deductible. Now that formula has been increased, keeping in view that it hasn't been revised for the past 10-15 years. The new formula is that on the first 6 lakh of book profit, 3 lakh is allowable, and for the rest, and or 90% of the book profit, whichever is more, and on the balance 60%. It was earlier 3 lakh and 1,50,000. Now it has been effectively doubled. I've also covered the NPS benefits for taxpayers opting for new regime. Just to clarify, this NPS benefit is only applicable if you're opting for the new regime, and it is not applicable if you were opting for the old regime. What was angel tax? And I'm sure a lot of you must have been hearing about angel tax being abolished. When, as a private limited company, you were issuing shares to an investor or to any other person, if the shares were being issued at a premium, then there was a valuation report required previously. This valuation report was required to ascertain the fair market value, because if the investor put in money in a company exceeding the fair market value, it would have been taxed under section 56. Now this has been abolished for residents and non-residents alike. This is a big change. If you are looking for funding or investment right now, post 1st April 2025, you will be able to raise funds at a premium without having any risk of taxation. Although it doesn't impact a lot of ISODA members, but it is a pertinent scheme whether you're investing in a new company or you were the investee company. So angel tax abolished. Buyback earlier was a tax efficient method for extracting profits out of a private limited or a limited company. This has now been changed by the government. I'll explain with the help of an example rather than get into the semantics of what the tax law is. Assume 100 shares were bought by you in 2020 for 40 rupees per share. The total cost for these shares was 4,000 rupees. Now the company buys back 20 shares at 60 rupees per share. So basically, out of these 100 shares जो आपने 40 rupees में खरीदे हुए थे, you're selling them off, or the company is buying back them at 60 rupees. So the differential, the buyback resulted in a deemed dividend income. So the differential deemed dividend income of 60 into 60 rupees per share into 20 rupees per share, the value of this 1200 will be taxed as dividend in your name. So basically the entire buyback proceeds will be taxed as deemed dividend in the hands of the shareholder. Now obviously the second question would be that if the entire sale consideration is being shown as dividend in the hands of the shareholder, what happens to the 4,000 rupees that I had initially spent to acquire those shares, or the 800 rupees specifically which I had paid to acquire those 20 shares? Those will be allowed as a capital loss and can be set off against the capital gain. So the capital loss from the buyback is calculated by subtracting the original purchase price from the buyback price. The original cost was 800. This will be allowed as a capital loss to you, but the dividend will be taxable at flat rate. So if you're in a 30% tax slab, buyback right now is not a recommended way of extracting profit out of the company. It is now tax inefficient, whereas earlier it was tax efficient because the company merely had to pay a 20% tax and the buyback was exempt in the hands of the shareholder. Now it is taxable at slab rate similar to dividend. So the key thing to keep in mind right now is that buyback and dividend are now on the same plane for you as a shareholder of a private limited company. Just taking a small detour here and asking if there are any questions till this part before we head on to what are the changes in TDS. Any questions? I would appreciate anything in the chat window also. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. There have been certain changes in the TDS rate, unfortunately not in the sections we would have wanted. The biggest change which will impact only partnership firms and LLPs. Let me repeat, this change which I am highlighting is only impacting partnership firms and LLPs, is that payment of salary, remuneration, interest or bonus by a partnership firm to partners was not liable for TDS earlier. When salary was being paid to partners or interest was being paid to partners, it was not liable to TDS, but effective from 1st April 2025, assessment year, the 1st April 2025, the new rate would be 10% on all payments exceeding INR 20,000. So please be aware, TDS is now applicable on partner salary. The earlier understanding was that it was not, but now it is applicable. Apart from that, payment of commission and brokerage used to be at 5%, now it is proposed to be at 2%. If you were paying rent in your individual capacity for a premises where you had taken on rent, the earlier TDS used to be 5%, now the proposed rate is only 2%. Another small change that has happened, which is of practical utility, is that if you were an employee in your organization, and I'm talking as a director or a founder also, and if you had spent some money for foreign travel, you are aware that the government levies TCS on it. Now that TCS resulted in additional TCS being levied. So at the end of the year, when you were filing your return, you saw that आपके salary पे भी there was TDS deducted, and then there was additional TCS which was collected on the foreign exchange payments that you had made. This resulted in a heavy amount of refund. Now the government is allowing you to adjust the TCS which is being paid on purchase of foreign exchange or foreign travel. It can be adjusted while calculating the TDS on salary. So an important thing to please tell your finance departments that at the end of the year, before deducting TDS for March, please check your 26AS. If there is any TCS which you have paid on maybe purchase of a car or maybe payment of foreign exchange, please give that TCS declaration to your employer. Even as a director, you should give it to your finance department so that TDS should utna hi kam deduct hoye, so that you don't end up with a refund where you have to chase the department for a refund for 7-8 months and your money gets blocked. So very interesting change, definitely worth highlighting. Please be aware of this change going ahead. Covering the Vivad Se Vishwas scheme, if any of the ISODA members were aware, it is a similar scheme now. The date from which the exact form etc. are yet to be notified. Disputed appeal proceedings post 31st January 2020 and before 31st January 2020, you can pay the amount before 31st December, either disputed tax or disputed tax plus 10%, or after the last date which will be notified by the government. So if there is any pending tax due or any pending litigation which is due at the CIT appeals level or the ITAT level, definitely recommend you to go for this scheme. If you feel that the chances on merit are significantly low, you have time till 31st December to go for this regime and opt for it and take complete immunity from prosecution etc. if your case is under CIT appeals or ITAT or High Court etc. A small change in the reassessment proceedings. Earlier, the time limit for 50 lakhs or more for cases for where the tax escaping was more than 50 lakh rupees was a period of 10 years. That has now been brought to 5 years. So essentially now records from an income tax purpose in all applicable cases have to be kept for 5 years and not more than 5 years. And if you're pretty sure that the income that can escape tax does not exceed 50 lakh rupees, then the time period for which you need to keep the records is now only 3 years from the earlier it was also 3 years, but now 3 years. So essentially the upper time limit is 5 years from the end of the financial year with which you need to keep the records. Beyond 5 years, none of the income tax authorities can open any assessment. That is a sure shot given now. With these, we've covered most of the assessments in the direct tax regime. I will just disable screen sharing and open the screen share for discussing the amendments from the indirect tax regime. Meanwhile, if there are any questions from the direct tax perspective, would happily take the same before I move on to the indirect taxes front. Any questions would appreciate in the chat window also. Just moving on to the next slide. Sorry, I'm just sharing the screen. Just 1 second. In terms of the indirect taxes, a big change is from the perspective of waiver of interest and penalty. Now, if you were subject to any show cause notice which had come for the period 1st July 2017 till the period 31st March 2020, so for financial year 17-18, sorry, I just started. For the financial year 17-18, 18-19 and 19-20, if there was any show cause notice issued under section 73, then the interest and penalty on that is waived. So if there is any outstanding show cause notice, I would request your finance teams to not discharge the penalty or the interest and wait for the notification to come, which should be coming any day now, which allows you to pay only the principal tax amount and not the interest and penalty. However, if you've already paid the interest and penalty for previous period for any of these cases, unfortunately, that refund is not allowed. So this just, in my personal view, signals the fact that the department will come out with amnesty schemes from time to time in terms of the GST. So if you are the subject of a show cause notice, please try and delay it till the time an amnesty scheme comes. That is one. The second part is that there were two types of show cause notice which could be issued under GST law. One was a regular show cause notice for notice known for fraud and willful suppression, which could have been issued with a higher timeline. Now, both the timelines have been rationalized under a new section known as section 74A. So there will be a single timeline for issuing of these show cause notices. So now you can be sure that if that timeline for a particular financial year has crossed, then no show cause notice under GST can be issued to you. So now the time period for both the show cause notices will be similar, and there is no separate show cause notice for the suppression, willful suppression and fraud part, and for the regular show cause notices. Similarly, if you are undergoing or facing any summons from the GST department, this summons usually comes under section 70. Now, in case of a section 70 summons, you can also approach through an authorized representative. Earlier, the GST department used to summon directly the directors, etc., which would result in the directors having to go there personally and give a personal appearance. Now, a proper officer instead of the director or an authorized person, authorized by the director, can also appear instead of the director. These are primarily the bigger changes in the GST. Most of the changes were covered in the GST Council meeting, which we had covered in a separate webinar, but most of the amendments to this were placed through the budget. And these are the key amendments from an GST perspective. This covers our key highlights of the direct tax and indirect tax budget changes. Would appreciate and open the floor to any questions, discussions, etc. Although there have been a lot of minor changes in various places, but amendments impacting ISODA members were limited to these only. Would be happy to discuss about the budget or any other aspect if members do have. The floor is open. So Meenaji, if you can maybe open the floor to questions by any members. I hope I'm audible.
I think there is one in the chat box, Dhruv.
So death insurance claim, if received by an individual on the death of a unfortunate demise of a family member, it's tax free. There's no tax on death insurance claim. I, in fact, wanted to discuss another topic with members, with the permission of the moderators, if I can, regarding the recent outage, the CrowdStrike outage. Was that we were discussing with a couple of other ISODA members regarding indemnification and claims which might come, or an ISODA member might be exposed to the same because of the recent outage, and how to legally protect from that risk. Has any ISODA member also faced in terms of any liability or issues in terms of the CrowdStrike outage? Any feedback? Any questions pertaining to the direct tax or budget? Any questions even pertaining to regular operations would be happy to address.
I think we can close, Dhruv, if we have no questions
Yeah,
and you
sure.
have no thoughts. Yeah. Thank
I
you.
think
Thanks.
just
I,
one,
yeah,
why
on the
government
chat box.
promoting new tax regimes, sir, basically they want to get rid of this whole exercise of checking ATC and ATD receipts, etc., and lower the tax rate so that, for you also while filing it becomes easier, and for the government also it's easier, rather than, get involved in scrutinies and check each and every proof which you have submitted to the department. Okay, I think so. Then we can close considering most of the questions.
Yes, Dhruv. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.